Welcome back, everybody, to another Danny Phantom review. Today we are talking about the episode Destabilized. And it looks like they accidentally made a good episode here. Yeah, let's get into it. So the plot of this one is Danielle's back. That's right, they finally remembered that they set up a new character at the end of the last season. And she's having trouble not turning into goo. She's kind of slowly, her powers are slowly getting weaker. She's destabilizing, as the title would indicate, and she's kind of turning into goo, like what we saw happen to the other failed clones. And so she's trying to find Dani to see if he can help her. Meanwhile, Vlad is looking for her and realizes that she's in town, and so he sends Valerie after Danielle. That's right, Valerie's also in this episode. Woo! Yay, Valerie! Best character. Team Valerie. Finally, we remembered the best character in the show after like 15 episodes of not seeing her. Yeah, so it's Vlad, Valerie, Dani, and Danielle this episode, and that's who we focus on. And it's good. It's a good episode. The first chunk of the episode doesn't even focus on Dani. It's just Danielle, Valerie, and Vlad, and it's great. It's good stuff, and you don't even realize that you haven't seen Dani in like the first third of the episode, because all those characters are interesting and have a cool dynamic. This is the first time this entire season where Vlad has actually felt not only like his classic self, but like he has a purpose for being in the episode, which is ridiculous considering the number of episodes he's in this season. Valerie, of course, also has interesting and relatable motivations for why she's doing what she's doing. She even kind of relates to Danielle to a certain extent, because Danielle's kind of been on the run. She's essentially homeless this episode, and Valerie's like, yeah, no, I sort of get where you're coming from. That sucks. But at the same time, Valerie finds out that Danielle has a link to Dani, and so she's trying to get to him. All good character, soap opera-y dynamics, all fun and interesting stuff. It all kind of culminates at Vlad's lair. He's trying to kill Danielle. Dani and Valerie team up to stop him. Dani uses this gadget that his dad was working on earlier in the episode, which was supposed to destabilize ghost molecules or whatever, but it actually has the reverse effect and makes the molecules stable and more stronger or something. He uses that on Danielle and she gets fixed. They all team up and fight Vlad, and it's cool and fun, and it's a good episode. Yay, we did it. We got a good episode. It's so refreshing to have not only a good episode in this season, but one that remembers a bunch of the plot points they had set up earlier in the show, remembers characters who are like main important characters but we haven't seen in a while, and does something like interesting and cool with them, and is like, yeah, this feels like the natural next step in the main like overarching plot and story stuff that was set up in this show. I don't know why the rest of the season wasn't like this, but I'm really glad we got this episode, because I'm guessing that like at some point one of the writers was like, hey, we only have 2 episodes left, and one of them is the big like finale thing. Maybe we should actually try to wrap up some of the plot points from this show that have just been loose for like this entire season. And they do, and it's good and cool, and it's like finally an episode that feels like it's worthwhile watching. Like on rewatch for this show, arguably you could say that like the Vlad Mayer stuff is kind of important because that comes back in the finale, but like in terms of like character story stuff that actually feels like relevant and important and like essential, this is like the only episode this season that's like worth rewatching, other than maybe the finale, which we'll get to. They actually remembered stuff that was set up earlier. They're actually dealing with it and paying it off, and it's like good, because for a minute it looked like we were just gonna ignore everything that was set up before. Tucker and Sam just kind of fuck off early on in the episode, and like they're not really missed. It's one of those things that's like they're main characters of the show, and like yes, they are important, but also whenever we get to like a big like story focused episode with our like characters who are actually interesting and dynamic, like Valerie and Danielle and Vlad and stuff, Tucker and Sam aren't that important. Like this episode is just Dani, Danielle, Vlad, and Valerie, and that's all you need. Like, yeah, Tucker and Sam are there in most episodes and whatever, blah blah blah, but like those are the core main characters that make this show interesting, and like that's all you really need to focus on. We don't really have any like high school stuff or even necessarily any like personal real life problems that Dani's dealing with in this one either, just like the rest of season 3. But here it doesn't really matter because we're dealing with the like soap opera character interactions and dynamics that's really interesting and cool, and it's just like so refreshing to have an episode that feels like it has some weight to it and is about like the characters that you like, that I don't mind too much that this episode doesn't really bring up the high school dynamics. At the end of the episode, once they've saved Danielle and kind of gone their separate ways, Valerie heads back to see Vlad, where she finally finds out that he's actually Vlad Plasmius, the ghost villain that she's dealt with before. And this is an important character moment for Valerie. She not only realizes that Vlad is a villain, but it's also like a big betrayal from her trust. Vlad has been like really kind to her up to this point. He's been kind of a mentor figure for her. He's given her all her ghost hunting equipment, but now she realizes that he's actually evil, and it's like a dramatic betrayal, and you really feel that too. It's cool because it's not just a betrayal of her trust, and it's like, oh, this guy I thought I could trust turns out is not trustworthy, but it's also kind of like her learning more about how the world works too, because Vlad's the mayor at this point, so like he's good government authoritative mayor person. Like he does a lot of stuff to try to make his image look like he's a good guy, and it turns out no, he's bad. And so this is a cool moment for Valerie that I wish went anywhere because at the very end of the episode she's like, oh shit, Vlad's a bad guy, well, guess I'm coming for you next. And that's like the big like fuck yeah cliffhanger moment, which is kind of cool, except that it doesn't really come back in the finale, which is the next episode and the last one of the entire series. It's not a fault of this episode, just a frustration of where the series has gone overall, where this episode does a lot to try to wrap up some of the storylines and plot threads that had just kind of been left and forgotten about up to this point. We get a resolution on what happened to Danielle, not just like where did she go, but like the whole thing about if she was gonna melt and turn to goo like the other clones or not, which was a specific plot point from the first Danielle episode. So like they resolved that as well. But a bit of character resolve with Valerie as well, as she kind of realizes that like, okay, Dani Phantom is not all bad, and maybe he is on the side of good, at least from time to time. And Vlad, the guy that she's kind of been working for, is evil, and she like realizes that. It's the natural like progression of where her character would inevitably go. It does a good job of covering all those bases, but at the same time there's still kind of a lot of story left. Some kind of big final confrontation with Valerie and Vlad would be really cool to see. We don't get it because if this were a better structured season and they had more of a better idea of that they were ending, which I'm not positive that they did. The way that animated series often get picked up is that the studio will order like 100 episodes or like 50 episodes at once or something like that. So they just kind of start working on a bunch of episodes at the same time. I don't think that they like had everything in place in order to try to wrap everything up once they got the word that they were canceled. This is one of the only episodes that even tries to attempt to like kind of address some of the story threads that have been like set up earlier on in the show, and the finale feels incredibly rushed, but we'll get to that next episode. It's just sort of frustrating because if this episode came out early on in the season and then the rest of the season was kind of spent building up some kind of big confrontation between Valerie and Vlad, dealing with Danielle becoming a bigger part of the show, and remembering the time that evil Dani got trapped outside of time and still exists out there somewhere. Remember that cliffhanger that they just completely forgot about, and trying to wrap up some of the like overarching themes and ideas of the show and characters and stuff for the show overall. This season could have been so much better, and apparently, as this episode shows, they still had the talent to like do it. I'm just very thankful that we at least got this episode and that this entire season isn't a complete waste of time. But yeah, that's about it. I don't think this episode is necessarily as strong as the first episode with Danielle or even some of the earlier stuff with Valerie, but it's so refreshing this season to get this episode and it to be like good and have these characters that we haven't seen in a while but are important characters to the overall like story. I'm very, very thankful that we got this episode, and it's cool and pretty good and worth watching, which is more than I can say for most of this season. But that's about it for this one, and we will see you next time where we break down the big old two-part series finale, and it's gonna be a whole thing. So get ready for that one, and well, I guess we'll see you then.